Just to go over some things before we get started, I'd like to introduce ourselves. So my name is Deandra Durand. I'm a program assistant with the Russell Sage Foundation, and I'll allow my colleagues to introduce themselves at this time.
Hi, I'm Stephen Glauser. I'm a senior program officer at the foundation.
Hi all, I'm Maya Donald. I'm a program assistant at RSF.
Great. So welcome everybody to today's presentation on grant writing with the Russell Sage Foundation. Before we get started, we're going to touch on a quick few housekeeping notes. First, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to our website in a few days. If you have questions about that, please feel free to email us at programs@rsage.org. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please add them into the Q&A section. We will answer questions at the end of our discussion. And keep in mind when you're asking those questions to refrain from asking any project-specific questions. This presentation is meant to be more general and kind of open. If you do have any questions for us, again, you can email us at programs@rsage.org. And without further ado, let's get started. So here we have a brief overview of what to expect during our presentation. So first, we like to share some details about the Russell Sage Foundation and our interest in the social sciences. Next, we'll review our funding priorities and funding mechanisms. This should provide an idea of what we are looking for in projects. And moving on, we'll review the application process for core research grants, followed by early career and fellowships. Finally, we will conclude with a Q&A.
The Russell Sage Foundation is a small private foundation. We're based out of New York City, and we were founded in 1907 by Margaret Olivia Sage with the mission of improving the social and living conditions in the United States. From 1907 until 1944, we were primarily a source of institutional support and information for private social agencies, and we focused on topics like poverty reduction, social work, and city planning. Since 1945, we funded basic social science research. Our four main disciplines that we fund are economics, political science, psychology, and sociology. We fund in these disciplines in order to strengthen the methods, data, and theoretical core and address some of the nation's pressing social, political, and economic problems.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you. So at the Russell Sage Foundation, we support social science research through our four longstanding core program areas. Starting with the behavioral science of decision-making in context, this program encourages economists and non-economists to study economic, social, political, and psychological decision-making processes, attitudes, behaviors, and institutional practices. For the Future of Work program, or FOW, we are interested in anything that impacts the labor market, including but not limited to AI, the effects of minimum wage raise, unionization and worker power, etc. Next, the Social, Political, and Economic Inequality programs, or SPEI, examines the factors that contribute to social, political, and economic inequalities in the United States, and the extent to which those inequalities affect social, political, psychological, and economic outcomes, such as educational and labor market access and opportunities. Lastly, the Race, Ethnicity, and Immigration Program, or REI, examines the roles of race, ethnicity, nativity, and legal status, and their interactions with each other and other social categories in the social, economic, and political outcomes for immigrants, US-born racial and ethnic minorities, and native-born whites. Please note that we recognize that these programs tend to overlap. If a PI is confused about which program area their project may fall under, just send us a quick email and we'll get back to you about where we feel that your project may fit in. Furthermore, there are certain areas that Russell Sage tends to not support. So that includes studies that focus on health outcomes, studies that focus on educational processes, teacher outcomes, or curricular development. Um, any projects that are centered on subjects outside of the United States. So, for example, if you are studying French labor movements or unionization movements in France, amazing, but we will not fund that project. It has to be a US focused project. Um, and Russell Sage will not support funding for operational support, program evaluations, animal studies, etc. In addition to our core program areas, the Russell Sage Foundation also has two special initiatives. The first is the Immigration and Immigrant Integration, co-funded with the Carnegie Corporation of New York, that supports innovative research on the effects of race, citizenship, legal status, and political culture and public policy on the outcomes of immigrants, and for the native-born of different racial and ethnic groups and generations. The second special initiative, co-funded with the Hewlett Foundation, the Spencer Foundation, and the William T. Grant Foundation, center on the repercussions of the 2023 Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action. This initiative seeks to fully understand the downstream effects of the decisions relating to labor outcomes of graduates and reactions from organizations and people in hiring processes relating to the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action. But again, if you have questions about this, if your project is aligned with our program areas and special initiatives, again, feel free to email us. Moving on.
We support research on these funding priorities through numerous different funding mechanisms. This webinar is going to focus on our core research grants and our pipeline grants competition, since those are the two deadlines that we have this fall. Our core research grants are 1 or 2 year grants of up to $200,000, which are open to all applicants with a PhD or a terminal degree in their field, regardless of citizenship or institution. These grants are a two-stage application process where you first submit a letter of inquiry, and then pending positive reviews, you'll be invited to submit a full proposal. The approval process for these is different depending on the amount. Grants over $75,000 are approved by RSF's president, while grants over $75,000 go to our board of trustees to be voted on. The upcoming deadline for our core research grants is October 29th, 2025. Our early career grants, we have 3 mechanisms: the Sheldon Danziger Pipeline Grants Competition, the Causal Research on the Criminal Justice System Program, and our Dissertation Research Grants Program. These are smaller 1-year grants, and they're one-stage applications where you submit everything that we need to evaluate at the time of application. There are various restrictions on eligibility. The Pipeline Grants Competition, which we have a deadline for on October 22nd, is open to all non-tenured or pre-tenured professors, including adjuncts and lecturers. We'll have more detail about this program towards the end of the presentation. Our CRCJ program is only open to tenure-track assistant professors at U.S. institutions, and the Dissertation Research Grants program is open to ABD PhD students at U.S. institutions only.
RSF offers 2 prestigious in-residence fellowship opportunities, the Visiting Scholar and Visiting Research programs. The main differences between these 2 programs is that the Visiting Scholar program is funded up to 10-month fellowship during the academic year, and the Visiting Researcher is an unfunded short-term fellowship of typically 1 semester within the academic year as well. Both fellowships occur between September of June of the academic year. Russell Sage also has an open access interdisciplinary journal that you can submit articles to. For journal submission dates, please sign up for our newsletter for further details.
Transitioning to talk more in depth about our core research grants. These are, again, 1 or 2 year grants up to $200,000. For these, we have 3 deadlines each year at which we rotate which programs we're accepting applications under. So at the October 29th deadline, we'll be accepting applications under our behavioral science and decision-making in context and race, ethnicity, and immigration programs, as well as the immigration and immigrant integration and 2023 Supreme Court decision special initiatives. Applications submitted at this deadline will be approved for time to summer 2026 for a start date in September of next year. For these grants, you can request funds to support summer salary, research assistance, data collection, data access costs, and survey fees. We don't typically allow course buyouts unless you have an extremely high teaching load, and things of that nature.
So the materials that are due at the time of submitting your LOI are really 2 things. You need your 4-page single-space LOI. That does not include any charts, figures, or references or survey guides if you are doing interviews or surveys. But we do ask for charts and figures and references that you try and keep that to a page, if possible. And we also only require a 5-page CV. For your LOI, we ask that you don't go too much into your budgets, as we do not require those materials until later into the review process. At most, I would say that you provide 1 to 2 sentences that basically gives you or gives us an idea of how much you're requesting and what you're requesting the funds for. Again, we will ask for those materials later on in the review process. Some tips for making a strong LOI would include making sure that the project is a fit for the Russell Sage Foundation and our funding priorities. That your research questions are driving the LOI, meaning that you're mapping out your research design, that your data and methods are tight, and that they are, again, supporting the research questions that you are presenting. That you're balancing your narrative and you're balancing your personal narrative. So, lengthy questions about your qualifications or for the fit with RSF's goals are a little unnecessary. We have your CV, so we can see how qualified you are. And if you are able to present your research questions in a cohesive way, then we will understand that it is a fit for our foundation. Again, you should provide sufficient information about your research methods. This is Russell Sage Foundation is a highly data-driven organization. So I would say that your 4-page LOI, it should possibly be about 60% dedicated towards the research methods in itself. Try not to overpromise or exaggerate. You should be able to show the strengths and limitations of your design, methods, and analysis. And we do have sample LOIs available on our website that we would be happy to share with you if you reach out.
As we've said, this is a 2-step application process. So once you submit your LOI, it'll go through internal staff review. What we're looking for at this phase is fit for the RSF's funding priorities. We're looking for, is there enough detail for us and for external reviewers to evaluate what the proposed study plans to do, and is the design appropriate to answer the research questions? Common reasons for rejection of this phase at this stage are not meeting those bars, particularly not being a close enough funding fit for RSF's current funding priorities. After internal review, we'll send out our LOIs for external peer review, where we'll ask evaluators to comment on the contribution of the study, the match between the design and the research questions, the suitability of the design, and the relationship between this proposed study and existing theory and literature across multiple disciplines.
So if you are invited to submit a full proposal, the required documents will be as follows. The 20-page double-spaced proposal. Again, that does not include your charts, references, or interview guides if that is part of your project. We would require a budget template or a budget from the RSF approved budget. We will be sending that to you via email. And if you have questions about that, again, feel free to reach out to us. We will also require a budget narrative and project timeline, a response memo to your LOI reviewers, and the CV of your co-PIs if that is applicable. I'd like to note that CVs at both the LOI stage and the proposal stage can be up to 5 pages. So feel free to send a CV up to 5 pages. When some tips for responding to reviewer comments. We ask that you try and respond to your reviewers as thoroughly as possible. Typically, when these proposals are sent back out for external review, we will go back, or we'll try and go back to the LOI reviewers, so they will be able to see your comments. And they will notice if their questions have not been answered, or maybe they feel like it hasn't been answered thoroughly. So when you are responding, please make sure to respond as much as possible and graciously and in depth. You should also note that technically speaking, we do not have a limit on the response memo. Not saying that you should submit a 30-page response memo, but you should not feel that you are limited to 5 or 4 pages in a response memo. We give you that space so that you can answer as thoroughly as possible. And of course, if you need further guidance, we would be happy to share some sample proposals that are available on our website.
Once you submit your full proposal, which for this round will be in February of 2026, it'll go back out for peer review, likely to the same reviewers, plus 1 or 2 from the LOI round. We're asking the reviewers the same thing as we did in the LOI round for contribution, match between the design and the research questions, grounded in theory, and then were they responsive to feedback? You don't have to make all of the changes that the reviewers suggest or recommend, but you do have to explain why you do and why you decided not to. From this point, you'll be asked again to respond to the second round of reviewer comments. And then if it's a trustee level proposal, so if it's over $75,000, it'll be reviewed by one of RSF's standing advisory committees. They'll make a recommendation, and then it will be sent to the board for a vote and for approval. If it's below $75,000, it won't be reviewed by an advisory committee unless a committee member had particular concerns, but it'll go straight to the president for approval. And again, funding decisions for the LOIs submitted at this October deadline are made time to the June 2026 Board of Trustees meeting for a start date in September of next year. So transitioning to one of our early career programs is the Sheldon Danziger Pipeline Grants Competition. The deadline for this program will be October 22nd of this month, next month, at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The goal of this program, and generally all of our early career programs, is to provide support for researchers and underrepresented in the social sciences. And we typically mean this pretty broadly. We're not just considering race, ethnic diversity, but also geographic diversity, institutional diversity, etc. So for individual researchers, we are providing 1-year grants of $50,000. And for research teams, we are providing 1-year grants of $65,000 for the pipeline program. So some eligibility requirements for this program includes
that applicants must be early career scholars, so that means assistant professors, lecturers, assistant adjunct professors, etc., with a PhD post January 2014. The PI or co-PI may not have received a core research grant prior to receiving the pipeline grant. So if you are on a project with a co-PI who received a funding from Russell Sage in the past within the core research grants, then they would not be eligible for funding. However, you would be funded, but you would be limited to the 50,000 cap. Also, associate professors and full professors are not eligible for funding. And some perks of the program include summer salary, data, research assistance, and course buyouts and conference travel are allowed expenses. There is a senior scholar mentorship component within the program. We will ask you to list mentors that you would like to work with on your project. And we do have a pretty good track record of getting people their top choices. At the end of the grant year, there will be a workshopping conference where you'll be able to present the work that you have done for your project thus far and receive feedback from scholars within the Russell Sage community.
Our early career programs, as well as our fellowships, are a one-step application process. So you'll submit your application, it'll go through our internal staff review for the same screening priorities that we've spoken about already, and then be sent for external peer review. If the reviewers recommend funding your project, you'll be asked to respond to their comments, and then it'll be reviewed by an RSF Standing Advisory Committee. Our early career projects all fall under the presidential approval bucket, whereas our fellowships will be sent to the board for final approval.
Okay, as my colleague earlier said, this is a one-step process. On this page, I would like to draw your attention to the green boxes, as those are the ones most relevant to the Sheldon Danziger Pipeline Grants Competition. So at the time of submission, you will only need a 7-page single-space proposal and the CV of the PIs and co-PIs of 5 pages at the most. The requirements are very much the same as for LOIs. We ask that you tie your research questions to our funding priorities and that you focus primarily on the methodology of your project and really just give us an explanation of how you are going to complete your project. Post-review, there will be some grantees invited to submit a response memo to the reviewers. Since this is a one-step process, your reviewers will not see those comments. However, the advisory committee will be reviewing them. So again, we ask that you thoroughly respond to your reviewers and provide as much detail as you see fit. Post-approval of your grant, that is when we will invite you to submit a budget, which will be emailed to the PI, a budget narrative, and you will also submit other due diligence materials, including IRB approval, confirmation of data access, etc. Those that are invited to submit a budget will be also invited to participate in a webinar where my colleagues will walk you through the budget process and what are allowable and non-allowable expenses. Okay, so that is our presentation. We will now open the floor for Q&A. And I see that there are some questions already in our Q&A, so we'll just go through them one at a time.
Yeah, and I highly recommend that you go and scroll through the answered questions in the Q&A. I've been trying to keep up during the course of the presentation, but one that came up a few times that I really want to just address, I guess, live is sort of the nuance between what educational projects the foundation tends to support. And so I think it might help if I explain the logic behind this limitation, both for this comes up with health outcomes research and educational research. This is one of those things where RSF is trying to find our niche in the funding landscape. And there are other funders that focus on topics like that. In health, you have the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We used to have the National Institutes of Health and things like that. So that was generally the logic behind, okay, there are other folks doing a lot of work on like mortality rates or things like that. We don't need to focus on that. What it does mean is if the health outcomes are maybe on the other side of the equation, like health outcome leads to some sort of economic inequality due to medical debt or something like that, then maybe that's something we're interested in again. Similarly, for education-based projects, there are other places like both the Department of Education, or I guess there used to be places like the Department of Education for funding, but the Spencer Foundation is a great example of a private foundation that funds education research. And so we sort of don't want to overlap too much with someone else who's doing work in an area, but we do recognize that a lot of educational attainment research has implications for a lot of the priorities that the foundation does care about, being things like inequality, racial equality, or the differences in different racial groups at levels of attainment. So we tend to interpret it as student outcomes are things that we are more interested in. That can be things like degree persistence, dropout rates. It could even be things like grades and GPAs and things like that, particularly as students sort of approach the labor market. So that would mean like less on like early childhood education and development stuff, and more on like high school, college, or secondary school sort of outcomes and things like that. We tend to say that we don't support things looking at like educational processes. And this is because we've actually seen a lot of applications looking at like curriculum development, teacher hiring practices, or various like administrative ins and outs, the very inside baseball of education, both K through 12 and higher ed. And those are things we're less interested in. We're less interested in how like the educational system works, and we're more interested in how it has effects on students and their eventual, I guess, their eventual outcomes. I hope that helps. If you have questions about whether your project is falling on that line of like, I'm not sure if this is something Russell Sage would be interested in, please reach out to us at programs@rsage.org with like a little abstract, a little sort of like a little preview of what your project is about, and we'll try to get back to you on what we think about that. So I hope, like I said, I hope that answers the questions about the educational and health outcome, sort of like what RSF does not usually fund topic wise. But we can move on to other questions.
So I see a question here. Do all members of the team for a pipeline grant need to have PhDs for a grant to be considered team-based? My understanding is yes. All PIs need to have to hold a PhD, but they must be to be eligible for funding, they must be early career scholars and may not have received a grant in the past. If you received a DRG application or a grant from us and you were applying for pipeline, that's fine since it's a small grant. But if you had been on a previous grant with someone else, then unfortunately you wouldn't be eligible.
We have a couple questions. We've had a couple questions about budgets as well, and how much detail to go into how we evaluate budgets and things like that. And I really want to stress that at the first step of any of these programs, that can be the LOI for our core research programs, or the pipeline proposal, or the dissertation grant proposal, or the criminal justice proposal, any of those at the time of application, we don't really need to know a lot about the budget. We need to know maybe like the top line number you're thinking of asking for. So you can say, I'm asking for $65,000 for use towards summer salary, research assistance, and payments to a survey firm or something like that. And that one sentence is pretty sufficient at this early stage. If you get invited to a full proposal, or if you're an early career scholar, if your proposal gets accepted, then we'll sort of work with you to create a budget. And if you're invited to submit a full proposal to our core research grants, then we'll ask you to submit like a line item budget, things like a budget justification, and things like that. I really don't want folks to stress about the budget at this stage because there's a huge opportunity cost just in terms of the space of your proposal narrative. LOIs are limited to 4 pages. Pipeline grants are limited to 7 pages. If you are giving us a half a page on your budget, that is space that you could have used to tell us more about your research design, and the details that we are telling you up front that we care about more. And in reality, the hurdle you have to get over is whether or not you get to the peer review stage. We internally review a lot, and we desk reject a good number, between 2/3 and 3/4 of projects that come in get desk rejected. So you really want to show us that you have an interesting research question that's relevant to the foundation, and you have a plan to get the data, and you have a research plan or a research design that includes an analytic plan, or you can give us the methodology that you're planning on using as to why that's the correct data and methods to answer the research question that you're posing.
So I'm seeing a few questions about when pipeline grantee should expect funding to be released. Those funds should typically be released by August, the 1st of August, or the 1st of September, if I'm correct. Is that correct, Stephen?
For pipeline grants, we generally actually expect them to start that summer. So if you apply this October, most of the grants will start in June.
Right. But our grants team will work with you. We do have a couple of people that are starting in September. So if you need to start in September, or you need to start in August, our grants team will work together with you to put that together. But it would be starting in the summer that you would have those funds dispersed. I also saw a few questions here about letters of support from your organizations. We typically do not ask for those things except for the visiting scholar program.
I
How-
answered a couple of these just to jump in. We don't need a letter of support from your university. What can be helpful is if you're working with an organization, or maybe a specific municipality, and you have a letter of support or you have evidence of a memorandum of understanding, that can be helpful to share as evidence of the feasibility of the project.
I want to answer sort of a couple questions in turn. One asking about, is there a place on the pipeline application to talk about how you might be underrepresented in the social sciences? And then there's another question that's also about how some of the example LOIs include a bio sketch of the applicants. So this is something I don't ever want to encourage folks to include a robust section on investigator qualifications or about the PIs or something like that. So it can be a thing where if you do include it, make sure that it's just a couple sentences. You only have so much space, and the opportunity cost of taking too much time or too much space to talk about your qualifications that we'll see in a CV anyway is really a sort of a waste of space. But if you do want to specifically call out how you are underrepresented in the social sciences for the pipeline grants, application. That's something you can include in the proposal narrative, but just again, just make sure it doesn't go longer than a couple or a few sentences.
So there is a question here. Are pipeline grants also valued within the context of the, well, 4 program areas? So for October, behavioral science, blah, blah, blah. So yes, in a way, they are evaluated with the 4 core program areas in mind. So that's what we mean that you should be aligning your research topic to our funding priorities. Those are our 4 program areas are our funding priorities.
But we don't restrict pipeline grant applications to those core program areas that we're restricting our LOIs to. Or you can apply under any of our core program areas or special initiatives. If your project is relevant to any of those, you're welcome to apply for pipeline. The LOIs are restricted only to those program areas and special initiatives that we listed earlier.
Just to answer the question about pipeline grant eligibility that has come up a few times. So first, if you've received an RSF dissertation grant, that does not count against your pipeline grant eligibility. We're talking about faculty level competitive awards that you've gotten from the Russell Sage Foundation. So if you've been an RSF visiting scholar, or you've gotten an RSF presidential grant or an RSF trustee grant, then we would consider you ineligible for the pipeline grants competition. And specifically, we're talking about RSF grants. It's possible that you may have received some other external grant and you might still be eligible. What we do sometimes, if some folks who apply to the pipeline grants competition, we look at your CV, you've had a history of success at other funders like NSF and I don't know, other private funders or something like that, and you have a lot of support and a lot of good mentorship. We may look at your application and say, you're not really our target audience for the pipeline grants competition, even though you're technically eligible. And instead of just like rejecting you if we think your project is a good fit, we will then divert your project and treat it essentially as an LOI. That's possible, and it has happened in the past. Where that line ends up getting drawn, like where we sort of determine what the pool of pipeline grants applicants look like, sort of depends year to year. But I just want to let people know that it's possible that could happen.
So I see a question here. It's a 2-parter. So the first question is, I saw the core grant requires pre-tested survey instruments indicating there should be some concrete plans, etc. Does the same apply for pipeline grants, or is it possible for the pipeline grants to be used as for starting data digitization processing? From my understanding, yes. For our core research areas, we typically would want, or we want people to show that they've kind of done the work, that they should have some type of preliminary data. And if you do have preliminary data for LOI submissions, then that should be incorporated into your LOI. For pipeline, since this is geared towards early career scholars and we want to support people in those early steps, we're okay with supporting projects that are for pre-testing, for piloting. The second question, Stephen, I think I'll let you answer this one. It's continuing on that. What are the deliverables required for the pipeline grant?
Sure. So actually, I'll even broaden that to talk about the deliverables for all of our grants. Any grant that you, and sorry, there's construction behind me and the window outside if that's coming through. But from our perspective, it's generally that our interests are aligned with yours. We are looking for you to like publish in journals and go on and get tenure, et cetera, and things like that. But that's the only required deliverables that we ask. Is we have a sort of like final narrative report, which is a short form that you fill out where you basically tell us what you learned We just want to know, like you said, you were going to go do this research project and you were going to look for these answers. Did you find them, or was it a no result, et cetera, et cetera? And then there's like a budget report that shows us that you spent the money. That's the only requirement from our side. We hope that you're going to go on and present at conferences and publish in journals, but that's not, those are not things that we control. We don't tell you which journal to apply to. There had been a question earlier about if there was a requirement that you apply, that you submit to the RSF journal. That is not a requirement. We do not limit where you can publish. You can publish wherever you like. I think that covers that.
There's also a question here, if a project has an international component, but I want to focus on the domestic aspect in the pipeline grant, will that count against my proposal? So we do on occasion support projects that have comparative topics, but the overall research question has to focus on the United States. So if you are doing research on like comparing Mexican and United States immigrant policies, that could be allowable. But just because you have a component that is international does not necessarily go against you. It's more that the focus has to be United States.
There's a couple questions about like types of research designs, or like well, there's one about qualitative work, there's one about participatory action research, and so I want to sort of talk about these different methodologies and different ways to submit your proposal. So first, I'll take there's a question about qualitative work. How do you demonstrate like legitimacy without pilot data yet? One of the ways for qualitative work and focus groups in general is to show in some fashion that you've done the on-the-ground work to make the connections necessary, that the population you're studying is going to talk to you. Like, so if you're like, if you're studying, I don't know, for example, an undocumented population, we would have questions about why they would talk to you. Have you made connections through various immigrant advocacy groups or churches, or some other, some way that you're in the community in some way. And so giving us any of that background is really helpful. It can also be a thing where maybe you've done one or two interviews already and you've sort of like, you have an idea of what you're doing. But we do want to see information about how you're going to select that sample. Like, is this going to be a snowball sample? Why is that the right choice to make? Is this going to be some other way that you're going to find your respondents? We want to know all of those ins and outs to show that you're sort of ready. You're at the stage where it's ready for an RSF investment. I think we are open to participatory action research. It's sort of like, what we are looking for is, does the methodology proposed, do the data and methodology proposed match up well to the research question being asked? And if the research question being asked is of interest and the methods and data being proposed are sufficient and correct to answer that question, then we can sort of move on from there. But we really want it that match to be the best.
I see a question here. Are the core research and pipeline grants only limited to US citizens or green card holders? The Russell Sage Foundation does not limit applicants based on institution or nationality. So if you are a researcher from the University of Oxford, we're happy to accept your application. The only program that we have a small limitation to is the dissertation research grants, which are for PhD students at ABD, and we just limit that you have to be at a US institution. But when it comes to citizenship, everyone is welcome to apply for us.
There's a question about like construction of the proposal, and there's actually another question about tips just in general for folks who are new to grant writing. So the question is, like we said in this presentation, that the research design should take up about a majority of your proposal narrative. That means the other half of it is spent on things like the overview, the background, the question, the lit review, things like that, and you have to shove all of that into the other half. One of the reasons we say this is we often get proposals that are too much lit review, especially from early career scholars who want to show that they've done the reading, that they've done their homework, and they don't want to like potentially not cite a reviewer who might read this and then be offended that they weren't cited or something like that. So what I want to do is allay concerns about that. We really do want to see the research design, because if you spend, say, 70%, 75% on your lit review, then you're only giving us a very short amount about what you're actually going to do or proposing to do with the funds. And that doesn't give us enough to evaluate. So you do have to shortchange the review a little bit. But ways you can do that are, you don't have to cite every single paper that says a thing in the narrative itself. You can include those in the bibliography or the work cited, which does not have a page limit and does not count towards the page limit. So you can just, so in the parenthetical citation, if that's the style of citation that you use, say like, we'll say like Maya Donald 2025, etc., or something like that. And then in the works cited, you could list all of the citations. You can just shove them all down there where it doesn't count against your page limit. And that way you're not crowding your lit review with every single citation that you want to make sure you shove in there. So that's like a little hint there. But in general, when we as a funder are saying that we want to see the research design, please listen to us. We want to see, like, these are the data that I'm going to get, or that I have access to, or that I need to get, or have a plan of collecting. This is why these are the right data to do it. This is why this is the right method. This is why this is the right sampling strategy. This is why a survey is the best thing to do, or this is why in-depth interviews are the best thing to do, or this is why an ethnography is the best thing to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Another sort of tip is to sort of anticipate reviewer concerns, poke holes in your own research design and say, yes, I recognize that this is a weakness in this design, but this is still the right way to do this, given these other limitations. It can be like, given that this is a $50,000 grant for 1 year, here's where I have to start, right? Like it's like, I could do this project the perfect way, but it would cost $1 million over 3 years, and that's just not realistic right now. This is the starting point, and that's a fine answer to have. But if you sort of understand the limitations of your own work and show why the decisions you're making are still the right decisions, that's a really strong thing to do, because then it's not the reviewers pointing out those weaknesses. You've already pointed them out and sort of parried any of their concerns with by showing your work and showing why you made the decisions that you made.
Well, I'm seeing a few questions here about the overall timeline of the pipeline grants. So again, the deadline for submission is October 22nd, 2 p.m. You should note that all of our program deadlines are 2 p.m. Eastern time. If you are not desk rejected, then you'll probably hear a response from us. Hold on, sorry, just looking at this. By mid-December. So that's when you should hear some updates regarding your projects. And funds will be available by either June 1st start date or July 1st. And that is again something that you will work with the grants team to put together.
We have a couple questions about what people use pipeline grant funds for, and whether the budget can be used for, like, for example, for open access publication fees. Historically, we haven't allowed folks to use funds for open access publication fees. I know that was actually a topic of conversation internally about if that policy was going to change, but as of now, we have not generally allowed for open access publication fees. But things people do use the pipeline grants funds for are summer salary, research assistants, payments to things like survey firms or respondents or their interviewees, things like equipment, like if you need recording equipment to do your in-depth interviews, or if you need a new computer to do some analysis or something like that. Also, we have a part of the budget can be for travel, both for data collection. If you have to go do your interviews in another city, you need to fly there, you need to stay in a hotel, you need to have meals. That's allowable. Also, conference travel is an allowable expense on pipeline grants, so you can go and present your work. But basically, any of the sort of direct research costs, like the cost you need to do your research, is generally allowable. And then what we say is, if you're not sure if it's allowable, please ask. But again, these are not things that you should be concerned with at this stage. We really ask for pretty minimal information about the budget at the time of application.
So we have another question here about timeline. So the LOIs and the pipelines are on separate timelines. Um, just to make that clear. So for pipeline grants, if you are desk rejected, you probably hear something from us by like late November, early December. Um, and again, you'll hear another update from us by mid-December if you're asked to respond to reviewers. That is for pipeline. For LOIs, again, the deadline for LOIs is October 29th. And you should hear updates about whether or not you're invited to proposal by mid-February. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the February. That's the deadline for proposals. You should hear updates from us about being invited to submit a proposal by mid-January. So I hope that clears up the questions there. And for the LOIs, those will be the final decision on LOIs that come in for the October 29th deadline will be decided in June with start dates in September.
There's a question about scalability. That's so sometimes the answer here is really sometimes. Some projects are sort of like pilot projects that lead to much larger projects that can be funded by other institutions that have higher funding rate, higher funding levels, or something like that. That can happen. We can do that, but it's also the case that there are sometimes small projects that are just small projects, and we fund those as well. So we don't have a preference either way, but it's something that happens and it's not uncommon.
This last question, I'm a little confused as to whether this is for pipeline or for LOI. We'll send, if you're moved forward, you'll be sent comments and a request for a response to comments for both pipeline and LOI. For LOI, that'll come as part of your invitation to submit a full proposal. For pipeline, it'll be a response to comments before we send the application forward to the advisory committee. So receiving the comments is just an intermediary stage before we make a full decision.
There's been a question about whether we have a data repository. So we do require that folks make data and code, et cetera, public. We don't have a data repository. You can use some of those that you can use ICPSR, the Harvard Dataverse, some other things like that. But RSF does not have its own data repository.
This last question remaining, can there be multiple aims? Yes, that's fine. If you want to get a little bit more specific, we'd welcome an email where you can talk through specifically the research design with us at programs@oursage.org. I think that's all that we have. I think we've cleared our queue.
Yeah,
And-
we're coming up on an hour
Yeah.
here, which is about what we like to budget. If you don't think your question was satisfactorily answered, or we had to rush through it, we apologize. We do only have this hour here, but please email us at programs@oursage.org. We're happy to try to get to that answer in the next couple of days. I do want to press upon people that the closer you get to the deadlines, the more hurried our responses will be. Academia is rife with procrastination, and we get more and more questions the closer you get to the deadline. These slides will be, this recording will be available on our website, if not today, by tomorrow, certainly by the end of the week. Yeah.
If
thanks.
you'd like a link to the webinar slides, please email us again at programs@oursage.org.
All right, thanks all.
gentlemen.